My name is Sarah Irving, and I am 32 years old. If you had asked me a month ago what power looked like, I would have pointed to corner offices and crisp suits and signatures that make numbers move. Now I know it can also look like my grandmother's key warming in my palm, or the way my breath steadies when I decide that I do not owe my parents my life anymore. I didn't come to that truth in a blaze of fury. I arrived there slowly after years of being told I was the strong one and watching that compliment become a leash. What happened last month only snapped it clean. I grew up watching my family tilt toward the sun of my younger sister's smiles. Melissa sparkled. That's the word everyone used. She was delicate and expressive and endlessly curated, and my parents poured themselves into her as if she were a glass that could never overflow. I learned early that adoration has economics. Ballet lessons, private school European summers, these were investments. My straight A's were considered free. My acceptance letters made them nod once, then lift their eyes to ask if I'd seen Melissa's latest showcase. Even now, I can remember the tight, bright sound of my father's voice at the kitchen table. "We have to be practical," he would say to me while carrying bills for things Melissa needed with the effortlessness of someone who always finds a way. Practical became my religion. I took buses before dawn and shifts after class. I learned spreadsheets like a second language. I memorized tax codes not because they thrilled me, but because they obeyed logic. My grandmother Eleanor was the one person who seemed to love that about me. She smelled like lavender and library books and always asked real questions: what I was building, what I wanted, what hurt. When she sat beside me on the back porch and told me that love without fairness is just a performance, I felt something unclench in my chest. With her, I wasn't the sturdy daughter who required nothing. I was simply Sarah. She left me her house. Of course she did. Even writing that makes my throat tighten, because it was not just a house. It was summer peaches cooling on the windowsill, coffee in chipped blue mugs, soil under fingernails from a garden that kept blooming no matter how cruel the season had been. When the lawyer read her will and my name, I cried the kind of tears that wash something old away. I could finally have a home that wasn't rented or borrowed or negotiated through someone else's approval. I could walk to work in 5 minutes. I could plant new things and not apologize for wanting roots. My parents congratulated me with the brittle politeness of people trying on a size that doesn't fit. By the end of that week, the real words arrived, the ones I'd expected, but still dreaded. "It's a big responsibility, sweetheart. Family shares. Your sister needs space for entertaining clients. It's not fair for you to hoard it when you already have a place." The texts were relentless, a day and night drip of obligation disguised as wisdom. They said I was selfish. That word echoed from every direction, their voices. My phone, the polite smirk of a realtor they brought uninvited to an attorney's office. Selfish for wanting the first thing that had ever been unequivocally mine. I tried to explain. I even tried to negotiate as if my life were a budget line to be rearranged. I told them about commute times and stability and the kind of quiet that heals the noise of always being the afterthought. But there is no spreadsheet for entitlement. There is only the devouring logic of Melissa needs, followed by the questionless assumption that I will bend. I held out longer than I ever have. The morning the ultimatum came, I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't imagining the cruelty. "Sell and split, or you're no longer welcome in this family." It was almost funny the way someone threatens to take away what they've never really given. I walked to the house that afternoon and let myself in. Dust hung in a shaft of light like glitter caught midair. I touched the banister worn smooth by my grandmother's hand and promised out loud to protect what she'd entrusted to me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. "Sarah, this is Marcus Chen. I heard you might be selling a property on Maple Street." His voice was calm, measured, the kind that asks permission by stating facts. I remembered him from college, precise mind, kind eyes, a boy who never wasted your time. Now he was the CEO of the company where Melissa had just been promoted, a detail that made the universe feel mischievous. I told him it had to be confidential. He said understood, and then, as if he'd seen my whole life on a timeline, added, This time you call the shots. That night, I spread documents across my tiny studio's table and read every paragraph until the words stopped blurring. I did not want vengeance. I wanted certainty. I wanted a way to choose myself that would not unravel under the weight of my parents' demands, or Melissa's tears, or an aunt's lecture about unity. Contracts do not care who cries louder. They only care what has been agreed. I slept for 4 hours, woke before sunrise, and felt a new stillness in me like a lake after wind. I met with the attorney. I met with Marcus. We spoke quietly and precisely. I signed my name in clean blue ink and felt my grandmother's hand on my shoulder steadying me. When the wire cleared, I walked the long way home and let December air sting my cheeks until the urge to turn back dissolved into breath. 3 days later, I stepped into a conference room thick with my family's certainty that they would win. They had brought their realtor and their pity and the full chorus of "for your sister's future." I brought my calm, and the knowledge that what was mine was already mine in a way no threat could undo. When my father said, "You'll sign today," and my mother murmured, "Don't make us do this the hard way," I realized something beautiful. The hard way for them was finally the easy way for me. My phone vibrated once in my pocket, Marcus arriving at the house where everything would soon be said out loud. I excused myself from the table, ignoring the way my father's eyes narrowed, as though he could smell rebellion before it spoke. I stepped into the hallway, pressed the answer button, and Marcus's voice grounded me. "I'm here. Do you want me to walk in now, or wait until you give the word?" My throat tightened, not because I doubted him, but because I'd spent years without anyone asking what I wanted. "Wait for my signal," I whispered. "They need to hear themselves first." He said, "Understood," and hung up. When I returned to the room, the realtor had already spread out glossy contracts across the polished oak. My mother pushed one toward me with her manicured hand, the same hand that once guided me across a busy street when I was little. "Sweetheart, just sign," she urged. "Do you want everyone to think you're cruel? Melissa needs this house more than you do." Melissa sat across from me, eyes glistening with tears she knew exactly how to summon. "I can't build my future without it," she sniffed. "Why are you making this so hard?" Her performance was flawless, but I didn't flinch. Years ago, I would have rushed to comfort her, swallowing my own needs like scraps of bread. Not today. "Because it's mine," I said simply. My father's hand slammed down on the table, rattling the pens. "Ungrateful," he barked. "We gave you everything. You think you can defy us without consequence? If you don't sell, you are no longer our daughter." The words should have pierced me, but instead I felt their hollowness echo in the air. They had never been mine to lose, not in the way I had needed parents. What they offered was always conditional, always tethered to Melissa's orbit. It was then that I realized I was already disowned years ago in the quiet ways that matter most. I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap, and spoke with a calmness that startled even me. "If that's the price of choosing myself, I'll pay it." The silence after was electric. Melissa blinked rapidly, waiting for the room to bend as it always had. My mother sputtered. "You don't mean that. Don't be dramatic." My father leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "Sign. Or walk out and never come back." I stood. My chair scraped the hardwood like a gavel striking. "Then I walk." That was the signal. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. The conference room doors opened and Marcus stepped inside, crisp in a tailored suit, a folder under his arm. My family's confusion flickered across their faces, first annoyance at the interruption, then dawning recognition. Melissa's lips parted, a faint whisper escaping Mr. Chen. My father straightened, eager to impress. "Marcus. What an unexpected surprise. We were just handling some family matters." His voice softened into deference the way he always spoke around power. Marcus's gaze swept the room, settling on me with quiet assurance before turning to my parents. "I'm not here socially," he said evenly. "I'm here on business. Ms. Irving and I finalized a contract last week." He laid the documents on the table, the ink of our signatures still sharp. "This house was transferred legally. Any further attempts to sell it are void." The color drained from my mother's face. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. Melissa's eyes flooded, but these tears were no performance. They were the sting of a stage collapsing beneath her. Marcus continued, his tone professional, merciless only in its clarity. I also suggest you refrain from misrepresenting property that no longer belongs to you. It would be damaging. He let the word hang, its weight unmistakable. Melissa shot to her feet, her voice breaking. You can't do this. That house was supposed to be mine. You knew that. Marcus regarded her with the faintest trace of pity. Supposed to be and legally are not the same thing. Perhaps it's time you learn the difference. Her sob cracked through the room. My father reached for the contract, scanning it desperately as though sheer will could erase the signatures. My mother pressed a trembling hand to her chest, whispering, "How could you betray us like this, Sarah?" And for the first time in my life, I answered without fear. You betrayed me first. The silence was no longer electric, it was final. A door closing on years of erasure. A verdict no one could appeal. Melissa's sobs echoed against the conference room walls, sharp and ragged, as if she had rehearsed this breakdown 1,000 times, but had never expected it to fail. My mother rushed to her side, gathering her like she was a fragile porcelain doll, whispering comforts that had always been reserved for her alone. My father, though, just stared at me with an expression that was harder to read, somewhere between disbelief and fury, laced with the helplessness of a man who suddenly realized the game board had shifted without him noticing. I stood taller, not because I wanted to gloat, but because I finally didn't feel like the background shadow in my own story. For once, I wasn't explaining or apologizing or making myself small. I had drawn a line and it held. Marcus closed his folder with a deliberate snap. My work here is finished, he said, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second that told me he had kept his word. He gathered the documents, leaving a copy on the table for my parents. Any attempts to challenge this will not only fail but also attract unnecessary legal attention. I trust we're clear. My father's jaw clenched. He looked like he wanted to roar to reassert his dominance in the only way he knew, by sheer volume. But for once, words failed him. He turned away, muttering curses under his breath. My mother, however, wasn't done. She straightened, still holding Melissa like a prop, and aimed her last arrow at me. You've destroyed this family, Sarah, all because you couldn't share. Do you know what you've done to your sister's future? I felt something shift inside me. Then, not anger, but grief. Grief for the years I had tried to earn her approval, for the love I had mistaken as conditional rather than absent. I met her gaze steady. I didn't destroy this family. You did every time you chose one daughter and erased the other. I've just decided I won't erase myself anymore. Melissa wailed louder, burying her face in my mother's shoulder. My father shoved the realtor's folder into his briefcase with a violence that made the pens roll across the table. And in that chaos, I walked out. The winter air slapped my cheeks as I stepped outside, sharp and clean like a baptism. Marcus was waiting by his car, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but steady. When he saw me, he gave a small nod, a gesture that said more than words could. You did it. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold, letting it fill the hollow spaces where guilt used to live. My phone buzzed again and again in my bag, but I didn't reach for it. For once, I wasn't compelled to answer, to fix, to soothe. I had made my choice, and it was mine alone. Later that night, I sat in my grandmother's old kitchen, the one place that still smelled faintly of lavender and lemon oil. The documents confirming the transfer were spread out on the counter, illuminated by the soft hum of the overhead light. I touched the ink where my name was written and thought of her voice. Love without fairness is just performance. She had left me this home not to start another war, but to teach me that roots don't come from pleasing others, they come from claiming the soil beneath your feet. The next morning, a headline found its way to my phone. A local business column reporting the sale, prominent CEO purchases, historic Maple Street home, new offices planned. The article quoted Marcus praising the property's legacy and hinting at exciting future developments. My name was mentioned too, not as a footnote, but as the rightful former owner who had negotiated directly. My parents would see it, Melissa would see it, the entire town would see it. And though I hadn't sought revenge, I couldn't deny the justice of it. Every time Melissa walked into that office building, she would be reminded of the house she tried to steal and of the sister she underestimated. Every time my parents drove past Maple Street, they would see what they had cast aside. And me, I would see a home that had already fulfilled its promise. It had finally set me free. I whispered into the quiet kitchen, "I kept my promise, Grandma. I chose myself." And in the stillness that followed, I felt something like peace. The weeks that followed were a blur of silence and whispers. My parents didn't call, though I heard from an aunt that they were telling everyone I'd been corrupted by money. Melissa blocked me on social media, which was almost funny, considering she had spent years flaunting her curated life into every corner of mine. Now, every time she posted a filtered photo of her morning coffee or a smug office selfie, she'd know exactly whose building she was standing in. I won't lie. There were nights when the quiet pressed too heavily against me. For so long, I had been defined by their expectations, their criticisms, their demands. Without them, I felt like I was walking in an open field with no map. But freedom has its own rhythm, and slowly I began to hear it. The first step was reclaiming my grandmother's house as truly mine. I moved in a week after Marcus's purchase closed, not because I had to, but because I wanted to breathe life back into those walls. I painted the rooms with colors that felt like me, deep greens, warm creams, shades of blue that reminded me of safety. I pulled weeds from the garden until my palms blistered, then planted new bulbs, pressing each one into the earth like a vow. Every evening, I'd sit on the porch with a mug of tea and listen to the world hum around me. It was in those moments that I realized the inheritance was never just a house. It was the chance to belong to myself, to stand firm without apology. But fate wasn't done with my family yet. One brisk afternoon, as I was arranging books on my grandmother's old shelves, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Melissa stood there trembling in her pressed suit, mascara smudged around her eyes. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the distance between us heavy with years of unspoken words. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice thin. I stepped aside. She walked in like she didn't recognize the place, like the walls were betraying her with every memory they carried. She didn't sit. She just stood in the living room, wringing her hands. "They know," she finally whispered. "Everyone at work knows you're the one who made the deal. Marcus doesn't trust me anymore. He says I have conflicts of interest." Her face twisted, desperate. "You've ruined everything." I felt a pang, not of guilt, but of recognition. Melissa had lived in the spotlight our parents built for her, a stage made of borrowed praise. Now the cracks were showing, and she didn't know how to stand without it. "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "You tried to take what wasn't yours. This is the cost." Her eyes filled again, but the tears didn't fall. She shook her head, backing toward the door. "You don't understand. They'll never forgive you. You'll be alone forever." Her words might once have gutted me, but now they slid off like rain on stone. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll be free." She left without another word, her heels clicking against the porch steps, like punctuation marks to a story she could no longer control. I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter or the scapegoat. I felt like someone who had finally chosen herself, consequences and all. And when the house settled around me with the soft groan of old wood, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice again, warm and certain. "Love without fairness is just performance." I wasn't performing anymore. I was living. If this story has touched you, remember this family doesn't always mean fairness, and blood doesn't always mean love. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop begging for a seat at their table and build one of your own. So if you've ever felt invisible or erased or unworthy, let my story remind you, you are allowed to choose yourself. And sometimes that choice is the beginning of everything. If this resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, betrayal, and finding your voice. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your story too.